Hello, folks. It's George Leoniak, and welcome to New Geometry. I'm excited to be here today. I'm going to share about a whole expansion in sacred geometry, all related to this tree of light, which I call it, which is Coxeter's nonagon, nine-pointed star, creating this nonagon shape. We're going to apply that to the Merkaba, and we're going to create a new golden Merkaba based on that relationship, and then we're going to expand it out into some amazing, incredible forms that are going to come and be birthed through that process. So this is an incredible expansion in sacred geometry. I hope you join me for this amazing journey. And I also wanted to just talk about a new offering real quick over at New Geometry Courses. This coming Sunday, which would be June 4th, 2023, and after any new geometry video or most new geometry videos that come out, I'll be holding a live drawing class. So if you're inspired by the material that's in here, it's a kind of a drawing discussion around the recent findings in the video, as well as doing some of the hands-on participation. Go check that out at the New Geometry Courses. That will be in the description, and I'll talk a little bit more about it at the end of the video. So let's share the screen and let's start talking about the new golden Merkaba and the tree of light and how the two are related and how do we get to some of these other incredible forms. So here's kind of a stylized version of that tree of light design. So this is the nine-pointed star in the middle. Now this is the icosahedron stellation diagram. That's the first place that I saw it. Was this nine-pointed star, and it was about the 59 stellations of the icosahedron, which are some incredible models that you can construct by basically using this as like a cutting template. Now, it was first, I guess, brought to geometry by H.S.M Coxeter and his team that produced the stellation diagram back in the 1950s. And it also has a relationship to George Odom's discovery of the drawing and how that this will produce a golden ratio from the edge of the equilateral triangle to the extension past the circles out to the larger outer circle. That will create the golden proportion between this length and the central equilateral triangle. So that is, I like to call it the tree of light because it gives it a more sacred geometry feel than the icosahedron stellation diagram. But as I'm going to show I have been showing in other videos and will continue to show, how this tree of life is really an incredible polygon that can be worked with for structural geometry, and it shows up in forms, it's hidden in forms, and it's leading to many KNEW discoveries for me. And that video is going to be a lot about that today, because one of the recent inspirations that I had was, well, here's the same drawing. Instead of looking at that as a single triangle, right, we're going to turn that single triangle into a drawing of the Merkaba, the star tetrahedron, the stella octangula, Hebrew word for chariot, Merkaba, light spirit body, as a more different take on all the same things. But essentially what it's going to come down to is this model and extending these triangles in golden proportion to create those nonagons around all 8 faces, right? So remember, this is got 8 triangles that make up this 2 tetrahedrons, because each tetrahedron has 4, and it has 8 vertices that it creates. So essentially it is a cube when we connect the outer vertices. So let's see what happens when we expand the cube to golden proportions based on following this formula. And this is kind of how I went about this through the drawings. Well, I extended off the blue triangle in the middle, which we're treating as the whole star tetrahedron, and that's going to give me the vertices of this nonagon around the outside. But what happens when we do all the other ones, right? Because that's just the flat plane, one of the flat planes. Well, what happens is this form emerges. So I'm still just showing one of them, but these are the vertices in a sacred geometry in the seed of life drawing with a little bit of additional lines. This is certainly an easy drawing that can be discussed and looked at in that drawing group. Is we get the vertices in the right spots to construct the rest of the form and produce the Knew Golden Merkaba, which is essentially 8 of those nonagons that are providing and constructing the rest of the form around it. Okay, and this is what we get. And let's just take a look at it, kind of an exploded view of it here, and look at what each of these hexagons, or this is the hexagon view, each of these nonagons look like when we kind of pull each of them apart. Now, the way to look at this, and this is one you might want to pause and kind of study to contemplate it a little bit more, is that we have the blue triangles that are in each of these faces. All those fit together to produce one of the tetrahedrons. So you could see this back edge would connect to this one, this side edge connects over to here, and that side edge connects over there. That's the triangle. The blue one is pointing down here. And if we take the red sequence of triangles and put them together, that is there. Great. We have our tetrahedron just based on the inner portion of this. But remember, we're dealing with the golden Knew Merkaba, and that then expands those out and produces the nonagon that is going to be around that central triangle, and that gives us the vertices. And it's still found in sacred geometry drawings without adding any real significant golden ratio changes. It's all based back on this simple diagram of extending the edges and a few additional lines, which have to be added in to get the cross vertices at different points, but all within the foundational pattern. So here it is in the 3D model. And there are crossing lines on these rectangular faces. Now, those are the edges of the nonagon that's going by as it kind of swoops around. It crosses the faces of those rectangles, and then it connects to the equilateral triangle and kind of continues on its journey around the back edge of the form. So we can draw it in square view too. So this is what it looks like, and square view is just two-fold axis. And of course, the nonagon is only flat to us in the hexagon view or the seed of life view, because that gives us a flat equilateral triangle. All these other equilateral triangles that you see, they're equilateral in real life. There's only one edge of this that is going to maintain the true proportion, and that's this edge here. They all fit together. So you could take red, 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 and red, and put those together in the blue and blue, and those are our two tetrahedrons. It essentially just makes a square, the vertices of a square. So if you put these together, don't be surprised. You're just going to come up with a square and a line down the middle. It's not too graphically exciting, because this is what it looks like, right? This is foreshortened a little bit, but it's a square, and there's your one edge across, okay? So that would be what this is going to create, and you got the blue one. But once again, this blew me away because, oh, wrong drawing. This blew me away because this drawing is found in the star cut diagram, which is just a super simple drawing. You basically just draw square using 5 circles, and then just connect corner of square to face, central face, the midpoint of each of the edges, and then just go around and create this 8-pointed star in the middle with one additional circle, which is the key one, which is around here, that gives you the proper placement to do the rest. And magically, golden rectangles just appear in the star cut diagram. But not only that, it does look very flat in 2D here. But remember, this is this form. This is 8 of those nonagons that provided all these vertices here. That, to me, just says that 2D drawings contain so much more about 3D information, multi-dimensions beyond, 4th and 5th and 6th and beyond dimensions, when we look at these not as flat and realize that the information is encoding higher level structures like this. So there it is. So we can also draw this in another view. This drawing was a lot more complicated to figure out. I didn't show the construction techniques here to get the drawing. I don't have a program where I could just rotate the form and be like, here's your image. This is what it looks like here. I have to hand draw and figure out the drawing techniques for everything here for the program that I use on the iPad, Sketches. So the way to look at this, of course, is these are the flat planes of these nonagons, which are now horizontal to you. So it looks like just a line, but here are the points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 would be on the backside. That's 7, 8, and 9, because this one's facing towards us. And these are the triangles. I actually put a line on this one by accident, because that's showing if it were a tetrahedron facing down, right there, that would be that line. But that's really the meeting point of these other faces that are now going to kind of glue together. And basically the rest of the geometry just follows suit, meaning the 9 vertices around the 3. So we have 3, 6, 9 connection here. They just sandwich together. They provide the vertices, okay? So here's the star tetrahedron in the middle. Let's take a close-up view of that. I've popped a little hologram, a little hollow person in the middle there to just show a classic view of what the Merkaba often looks like with the person in the middle. This is a new Golden Merkaba from that axial view, so we could see the cross-section of the planes. We're going to take this to a new level, and right now we're really just looking at this as if this were one central cube, right? And we've changed it to axial view, so it's rotating around like this, and that's what axial view is. It's not facing you like this. That's just, that would mean your Merkaba is rotating like this. That's a vertex view of the Merkaba. This is the axial view. So it's really just one cube that's been expanded, or one star tetrahedron that's been expanded into this nonagon vertices that are all around the form. So let's go ahead and just address a few things before we take it to a new level, because I believe that the sacred geometry designs and even these different structures that are produced, called like the tree of life and the Kathara grid, that they have a structural geometric basis. Now remember, there's many ways to view this. I have videos where I can show you the tree of life as a structural geometry, and at least 2 or 3 other ways. This is the most recent one, because I really started to look at this as, here's the outer cube. Well, how do we get the rest of the vertices on here? And this basically was another portion of the cube, which I could construct out of Zoom tools. It's an interesting model because it's really one of perspective to get it all to line up. But if it were smushed and transposed to being just flat, right, and we're not being tricked by our 3D perception, if this was all smashed down or smushed to a 2D plane, this is what these vertices would give you. And essentially, it's all given in on the faces of the cube, root 2 lines, root 5 lines, and 1-inch edges, all the way going around the whole thing. That's what gives you this proportion of the cube, or a fragment of the cube. Now, Kathara grid is another way to look at it, or the Kathara tree, which is the outline of this shape, which would be what this spiral is following. If they just get smaller and smaller and smaller, that can also be looked at from the same object, which is a portion of the tree of life just rotated. If it is a cube, that would be the flat version of it, as you see on the right. And if we did that with smaller and smaller, square within square, or smaller cube fragment within cube, we could create a spiral that would ascend out of this. But essentially, it's 2 views of the same fragment piece of a cube. One way to look at it. Okay, so that's my recent discoveries and connecting this to this. And essentially what I'm saying is that these diagrams, which contain information that we layer over top of it, has a basis in geometry, which is portions of structure, just like I'm showing that this tree of light, and I'll show with other forms, is also the basis of geometric structure, not just a diagram that we can put the nine labels to, right? So we can do that, but there's also structural geometry and it's a portion of forms as well. Now, this is another thing I wanted to address a little bit more in just talking about vortex math, and the nonagon that we often see, the nine-sided polygon in there, is 9 points regularly equally spaced around this blue circle here. And that will create those nine points, and we see that they're usually connecting numbers, creating a W that goes around. And one of the key things that I recognized here was when you actually do the blue triangle, which is the 3, 6, 9 triangle, 9, 6, 3, whatever way you want to orient the numbers, when you do that triangle, and then you do your W pattern, which would be going through this sequence, the points don't meet, right? The crossing point, the key points within the diagram, which is the blue, which is the 3, 6, 9, which are in that are often thought to be, like out of the matrix loop of the doubling sequence, right? Because the doubling sequence is represented by these red numbers, 1, 2, 4, 8, which of course is continuing the doubling sequence, 1, 2, 4, 8, and then we can hop back down to 7. And 7 is digitally compressed number, which would be 16, 6 and 1, we have 7, up to 32, which would be 16 doubled. 32, we got 3 and 2 would be 5, and then we continue on up to 1 again, which would be 64. 6 and 4 would be back to 1 again, and just continuing around our circuit there. Now, this nonagon here interacts with 3 locations on our doubling sequence doubling route. This is the one you often see Tesla standing next to with this quote of, understanding the universe, you have to understand 3, 6, 9. It would be nice, I feel, graphically and maybe even energetically with a rodent coil or things that work on vortex math, is to use a nonagon that actually interacts with the numbers 3, 6, and 9 at these key nodal points. And that's what Coxeter's nonagon does. This nonagon, as you can see, circled in black, leaves these huge gaps between the blue triangle and the doubling sequence. So to me, that's a symbol of the matter sequence of the doubling, disconnected from the spirit triangle. And what does the connection here is the golden ratio connection between the spirit matter connection, is because of this Coxeter nonagon, as I showed before, based on the Odom's discovery of extending the line of the triangle, and then icosahedron stellation of Coxeter's nonagon, essentially tree of light. Okay, just a few things I wanted to discuss there that I've had some floating slides that I think are good to put in there, but let's continue on now to see what happens when we take that single form that I did here, the Knew Golden Merkaba. What's going to happen when we take it to a new level and expand it into icosahedral symmetry? So we're basically going to take our, just like a cube, right, and a dodecahedron. See, a dodecahedron has 5 cubes in it. This cube just slides right in and we have 1. So we're going to do the same type of process with this, because essentially there's a cube in the middle of this. In fact, the cube in the center of this is this size. That's what radiated out the rest of the vertices here. And then we're going to rotate this form around into icosahedral symmetry, so there'll be 5 of them in it. This was a little bit of a tedious drawing to take a look at, or to discover and create, and maybe a lot to look at. This is what it looks like with all those forms overlapping and crisscrossing in all those color lines, okay? That's what I was working with on this. I grayed them out all in this because really what, after you look at that, after looking at that for a little while, understanding where each of those rectangles are, right? So these key rectangles that I'm discussing here, they rotate around, and what they basically do is they create a decagon, right? So that's, are all those little rectangles going around, they create decagons all over the faces of this new form. And the cool thing about it is it also creates the golden hexagon, of course, because this is a total golden hexagon, a golden ratio form being developed here, and the golden rectangle. So we have 12 decagons, 20 golden hexagons, and 30 golden rectangles. Essentially, it's kind of like the great rhombi icosahedron, which once again is regularizing every edge, square, equal edge, equal edge, equal edge. For the hexagon, everything's equal on this. So this is like a golden version of the rhombi icosahedron, or the great rhombi icosahedron. It has the same number of faces, the same number of vertices. The only difference is we have created a golden rectangles on these, which produces golden hexagons. The decagon stays the same. So remember, I didn't just decide to cut out those pieces, and I don't have a picture of the model, but here's the model of it. Golden rectangles, decagons, golden hexagons. So awesome model. And I actually have all the lines on the surface of the form here, which are showing each of the lines of the 5 forms that made it. Okay. Now, I'm just following a process of discovery here. I don't know what's going to happen really when I rotate, because remember, this is just starting with the tree of light on that Merkaba, basically from this one cube, and then now rotating the cube around, but it's moving that whole larger structure that's around it, and this is what it comes up with. Well, I was really, well, sort of surprised and not so surprised, because of course I'm like, geez, first of all, I'm like, someone probably maybe did this, right? And I saw on a Wikipedia site, they call it the degenerate version of, it's a degenerate version of the great rhombi icosahedron. It's degenerate, right? But luckily there was one other thing on there, because I saw the hull of it that said, hey, that's the truncated dodeca-dodecahedron. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is the truncated dodeca-dodecahedron? Well, basically, this was discovered, first published in 1881. It's always great to find out that you're in a long line of lineage of geometers, of how they've come to be, that the process of KNEW new geometry is not just to find any W stuff, but actually realize that the pattern language of sacred geometry is universal, and you will discover things that have been created before. It's actually a sign that you're on target, you're on the path, you're following the newness, and it's leading you in a direction. So here's the truncated dodecahedron from 1881 from the mathematician in Austria. It was first defined by Coxeter and his team in 1954, and they credit the mathematician, the Austrian mathematician, for that. So that's just incredible. And once again, Coxeter comes back into play because he's the one who really took structural geometry to the next level and produced the icosahedron stellation diagram, which is how I got here, was through his route of that diagram of the icosahedron nonagon. But I did it with the nonagon faces inside. So I have this drawing here that I was able to find of it over at Dia Makui's site, where I could rotate it around. He's got almost every drawing that can be done. And there's my drawing of it laid out right over top of the decagon faces. They came to it through a completely different method. But they still have the same squares that show up, right? So these squares that are rotating around, creating, there's another square, they're what are creating the edges that are creating the decagon. So I don't know what the internal architecture of that one is, like I know this one, because I know right back to the source of how it started for me, was connected to this Merkaba in the tree of light, but I ended up at this form through that process. And these are my crisscrossing lines on it. And, you know, the golden hexagon is in there. We could see if I connect, let's just drag that back over top. You could see that my outline of the golden hexagon is there. And it's in all these other forms these fellas discovered. They just don't call it that. And this form gets the title on the Wikipedia site under the great rhombi icosahedron, a degenerate. But it's a golden degenerate, at least. Okay, so I decided, well, I love to do things from another view. It gives me more information. It tells me more about the form. So I figured out how to draw it, both in the pentagon perspective and square view perspective and the hexagon perspective here, where the golden hexagon is centered on here. And yeah, to me, this drawing was like the ultimate expression of the golden seed of life, because it has 4 golden concentric golden circles on each of the main points of the seed of life, which are only these 6 points, 7 points with the center. And then we have all these crisscrossing lines, just parallel lines, right? All through the whole pattern, basically creating hexagons at every level of those circles. It's a golden grid, incredible golden grid. And all of a sudden, within this, I'm able to find the right proportions to create the decagon on that tilt, the golden hexagon tilted, the golden rectangles tilted, all through that. It's just totally phenomenal to me that this is just in this golden ratio sacred geometry. This is why the golden circle geometry or golden seed of life, or just the golden circles in general, because all the other views use, or pentagon view uses the golden ratio, square view will use the golden ratio, hexagon view too, should do that too. And this is what it looks like to break out of, I'd say, the Metatron's cube box, which doesn't do any of this. We'll never do this without the golden ratio. Okay, so the Knew Golden Merkaba, 5 of them in there, and I just wanted to show you one of them, which I've outlined in blue. Now, I showed you this form earlier, right? It's the one I did hand-drawn way back at the beginning, which was this one, right? And there it is, oriented straight on to you, because this is based on a cube facing us, just like we'd normally see it, kind of hexagon oriented like this. But once we get into 5-fold symmetry, it's so much easier to draw it in the golden seed of life, and that's why the icosahedron and dodecahedron, drawn with this system of the golden circles, will orient it this way. We can do it this way. But what happens there, and you have to see my previous video or other videos, is the cube will have to rotate that's inside there. It can't maintain its orientation the same way. That's also what Metatron's cube distorts, is saying your dodecahedron and cube are oriented in the same direction, but one's got to tilt. So in this case, this follows the rules basically and says, well, if you're going to draw me like this in 5-fold, I have to tilt. And there's the blue triangle, which is the same triangle there. And if you study these two, you could see that the rectangles are tilted over the side, because now it's operating in a whole system of 1 of 5 rather than dominating the central view and having that whole big form rotate. That would not be able to be drawn, I don't think. I'm not even going to try it because I cannot. This is so much easier. I don't know what's going to happen to all those lines. So it's got to operate as part of the whole, 1 of 5, to match here. So this is the rectangle and each of those decagons. There's another one hidden inside. This line is also on, these are all on the surface of this, right? There's nothing below the surface on this form. They're all on top of the surface. That's what all these lines, which I'll show you at the end, up close, each line on this, which I spent a lot of time studying, there's the crisscrossing ones. Each of those are actual lines of the form that's underneath. They're the portions of the tree of light. So here it is. It's great. I could go back to that website and I could test my work out by, well, I guess crudely putting it over top, but I have faith in the golden circles. This is all working, because when you get out to build something like this, it just won't work. I mean, this is your test. If you came up with something in sacred geometry that you build from your dimensions that you get from the blueprint, the template, this is what the template is pulling these forms from the template, the sea of information that exists within the sacred geometry pattern language. You reach into that light and pull it out, and it won't work like if we build it if the proportions aren't right. So here it is in this view, and let's just pull this over to the side, and now we can see there's a drawing. This is from Decagon view. I taught beginning apprentices how to draw this form in their fifth class with me last week, this pentagon view drawing of this complete structure last week with them. It was amazing. So there's another technique I have to draw that. This is some of the things we probably won't do a complete big drawing like that, but we will definitely get pieces of that drawing or different techniques to lead you in that direction through going to these kind of new geometers meetups, first ones on Sunday, as I mentioned. So here we go. You could just kind of trace out the lines. There's the square, and this is how they did theirs, and this is how I did mine with these rectangles within it as well. Okay, so I know this seems like a lot already, but we're going to keep going deeper and deeper, or expanding more and more, and take this to a newer level, because one of the first things that I discovered or found out about this form that I built here was what's going on. And this is when I started to build it. I had those crisscrossing lines on here, and I said, hey, let me measure this angle, which is right here. This is the flat building piece of this. So I measured the angle. I'm like, whoa, that's 108 degrees. Well, that means that that's a pentagon on this, and that's a pentagon. At this point, I didn't realize that these were decagon faces. This is prior to, just, I don't know. It's a circuitous route that goes all over the place. So I was like, let me extend that. I did this early on in the discovery. I was like, let me extend that and see what happens to the rest of the form. And I wanted to do it on all of these rectangular faces, extend the pentagon off of each of those. And that's going to take me outside of the bounds that I've constructed around the form by doing that. And that then creates this model over here, which I didn't create this exact one. I'm going to show you another one in a minute. That's going to turn into this in just a second, but it's going to create a beautiful another gem that can be found within all these pattern languages, sacred geometry, by extending these planes once again and reconnecting the vertices on a new surface of a sphere. All these are on the surface of a sphere, so these are completely contained within a golden orb of light. So let's see what happens when we do this. Right, so we're extending those lines. This is flat. This is a red line here, which is basically indicating that this is the height of the pentagon, just going from this point all the way up, because that's a flat face. You got to really, like I said in the previous video that I've done, maybe go back and take a look at that. Activate the inner eye. So when you look at these drawings, you see that that's a plane. It has depth and dimension. We can rotate that around. Here's one of the golden trees of light that are going around, because remember, those crisscrossing lines, the blue and the gold one here, are the red and the blue, and on either side of that, those golden tree of light crisscrossings are what create the 108 degree angle. So we'll take that to a newer level. We extend it all the way around, and of course I'm going to rotate this into icosahedral symmetry and produce the 5 of them around it and see what shows up when I do that. And this is a form that I made based on that. It had these unusual faces that were 6-sided, kind of blunt edged. I was like, that's unusual. It didn't really fit a pattern language. So I'm like, there must be something more to this. And just when I was about done with this form, I was able to look at it and realize there was a missing kind of component that I felt like I could add. In fact, it goes back to this form, which we're going to go to in just a minute, which I did prior to building this model, but that provided the missing information to complete the form. But this is still a quite cool, beautiful form with these square faces and this unusual decagon on top, and I was like, oh my gosh, what's this about? This is a weird looking decagon. Why does it have the tips nubbed off like that on the pentagon below to create the decagon? I just kept rolling with it because I felt like there was more to it. So there was more to it. And this, going back to the root form before we go to icosahedral symmetry, remember, we're extending those planes all the way around. And the key thing here, and this is just going to be probably a little trickier to describe, but underneath this, there's two forms, right? This is the one that was in the previous drawing, and it's a flat, big golden hexagon, and that triangle of a previous form is right on the face of it. Now, I could do the drawing, and I could see that there were lines that extended up to the top of that. It's actually a dodecahedron. In fact, it's two dodecahedron that are meeting at this place, but for some reason, they're missing their ends here, right? So I was like, that's the complete form. And that's what this form is, okay? It's this one here, okay? So this will produce this model here by extending all those around and completing the rest of the dodecahedron edges that weren't in this model over here, not that one, in this one here, right? That's why these came up with these odd looking faces. There needs to be more information that's left out right here. And that's what I'm filling in the blanks with now, okay? Kind of in my process of how to do that. And all of a sudden, so I built this model and I'm studying it and I'm like, wait a second, there are decagons on this, right? Look at that, that's a decagon face. And there's decagon hoops all throughout this. You can see it even on the model in my hand. There's a decagon that goes around, there's a decagon there, and that's a perfect decagon if it were flat. 24 decagons fused around to make this form. So I didn't realize that till I started studying that in hand. And then, of course, I also drew it from the pentagon, the hexagon perspective with these two golden hexagons, one side the other. Just a really cool form. I discovered this right after I discovered this one. I was like, let's see what happens with this. And then I didn't even do all the fivefold icosahedral symmetry stuff yet. But once again, you'll see that those decagon faces show up right here, and they're a portion of the golden hexagon. They're going to crisscross through because there are two equilateral triangles in each of these golden hexagons, and they're going to crisscross to create that. So there's two decagons. Now, this is a part that I didn't really know till like 2 weeks after those discoveries, is that this extended version of this Knew Golden Merkaba, where I'm doing those pentagons to extended, it turned out to be two truncated Archimedean solids. I mean, the truncated dodecahedron, two of them, and they were just superimposed over top of each other, okay? So here's two of them, one and two. I drew the truncated dodecahedron and made this two of them in two different orientations before I even knew that the truncated dodecahedron was in here, right? So that's amazing. That's just incredible. But the thing is that there's two of them, and that's the key to the new geometry expression of working with the icosahedron and dodecahedron. It's not just a single form for me anymore. The two are really fused. There's two icosahedron, two dodecahedron, and they make a more complete structure, just like a tetrahedron by itself is one single tetrahedron, but when you put two of them together, it creates a cube to create the rest of the vertices. Well, it's a similar thing with the dodecahedron and icosahedron. They make a more complete form, and I'm going to have to do a future video on that to describe more about what I mean. But because I was following that blueprint of working with a whole structure, let's say, it created this rather than just one truncated dodecahedron, which was like this. Okay, so that is just one of them. In square view, it looks like this. It's got these 12 big decagon faces, and the 20 vertices are nipped off, so we just get equilateral triangles. And yes, these are all regular equilateral triangles, because they're equilateral, and regular decagons. And to me, that was amazing that it created the underlying structure of what I created was the two, truncated dodecahedron. Let's get back to that one. And I want to, there we go. There they are layered over top of each other. Now, if you go back and look at this, basically what I did was just connect the missing lines to produce the outer hull of the structure, which of course is square view drawing of that would be this. Okay, and those are the two decagon faces. So I counted all those decagon faces and didn't even realize that that was two of those truncated dodecahedron. Okay, so as you guessed it, I'm going to, and this was a big task, turn this new form of the two truncated dodecahedron, just two truncated regular dodecahedron, into icosahedral symmetry. And here we go. This is the newest level. Wowza. Oh my gosh, I couldn't believe it. I think I really, it might be an uncharted terrain here with this one. This is 6 truncated dodecahedron. I realized that there were 6 when you do this rotation of the full dodecahedron. There was 6, not just 5. I have a whole video on doing that with the icosahedron, dodecahedron, and the icosahedron, and that's how I created the first time the nonagon showed up was in this form about last fall, so about 9 months ago or more. This is the first time the nonagon showed up. Now the nonagon shows up in these little sections over here, and all these other segmentations have to come together. There's that unusual looking, right, decagon on top. The squares are still in there. There's 30 squares. There's always 30 squares because that's like where the icosahedron is. Those 30 vertices in there, that's the 30 verti. That's the real structure of icosahedral symmetry, is the icosahedron. Because once you reduce those 30 points to 0, I mean, rather than being an edge, then you get the icosahedron, the Archimedean solid, the icosahedron. I'm looking around for one. Here it is. Right, so that is pentagon faces with equilateral triangles. It's icosahedron and dodecahedron. They've both just truncated both of them, and they end up at the same form. So that's the midpoint meeting point of the crossing of an icosahedron and dodecahedron edge. If you reduce those edges to 0, then you get the icosahedron. And just so you know, this is in other videos. This is made up of 5 octahedron. 5 octahedron are in this, rotated around in icosahedral symmetry, right? And all of a sudden they create all the vertices of this. Okay, so anyway, so here we are. That just so you understand what's going on there with the background of why the squares like that. But anyway, not to belabor the point, this is a 6 truncated dodecahedron. I call it the inuahedron. inuahedron was going to be in this. I didn't know it was going to be, but this is what it turned out to be, inuahedron. I love this part of it. It has 360 vertices, right? So 360 is the first form that I've created that come up to be 360 vertices, 422 faces, and 780 edges. There are 7 types of faces on it. It's 12 irregular decagons, 20 nonagons, 30 squares, a bunch of different sized triangles, and these kind of trapezoids, isosceles trapezoids also. So a lot of irregular, degenerate things going on here with this form, but it's very cool. And there's inner architecture here that I'm going to share in a moment, because it really isn't all these edges. I mean, I just tried to do some connecting the dots to make it an outer shell, right? So here's the form. I'm about to show some pictures of it. But it passes the Euler's polyhedron test, right? Which means if you take the 422 faces plus 360 vertices, and you subtract 2, you come up with 780 edges. So that's how I got the edges, but I did count all the edges out to make sure that it was accurate, and it is 780 edges. So there's the inuahedron in the square view. This is just so you can compare the two, the drawing to the actual model. And this is why when you're dealing with something as complex as the inuahedron with all these pieces here, you know, different isosceles triangles and 7 faces on this, your geometry has to be spot on or it's not going to work, right? And when you get out to that level, and that was basically following a hand-drawn process on the iPad and doing my other drawings as well, making sure the measurements transfer from one to the other, all that sort of stuff. But when in the end you get 360 vertices all on the surface of the outer circumscribed sphere around it, and that is the vertices of the 6 truncated dodecahedron. Now, there's always one that appears to be like the central one, and then the 5 others kind of circulate around it and rotate around. And the central one is connected to that bar in the middle. It's like the central dodecahedron, or the foundation cube of the rest of the movement that happens around it. Other videos in the future are going to continue to describe more about that. So here's the inuahedron in the 3D model in the hexagon view and nonagon view, right? Because there's the nonagon that's right there in the center, and also the inuahedron in the Decagon view, but it also has a pentadecagon plane within it and a Icosahedral view plane in the middle. So we have a little bit of issue with the 3D depth perception of the camera, but I've tried to lay out where the plane, so that means if I hold this with the pentagon at the top and the bottom, and I rotate this around, you're going to see that this is the icosahedron that I'm tracing my finger along as I rotate it. It's meeting up across the face of the square, across that pointy little triangle, across the face of that decagon, across the face of the triangle, across the square. That does that 20 times. So it's not a regular icosahedron, but it's an icosahedron. This is the first form I've ever constructed that has an icosahedron in it. I have a pentadecagon one, which was recently discovered. Still need to do a video on this one. That one's flat on the surface here. This is, believe it or not, related to this, but it's not the same one. It's not the same pentadecagon. That's basically 15 sides, pentadecagon, 15. The icosahedron has 20 sides. These are what those 2 layers. This is basically like an onion we're looking at now, cutting down the middle. This would be the top. This is the 15, and this is the 20. That's not right in the middle. And we can do these types of planes with the hexagon view as well, and the square view planes too. So it's pretty cool to see where the planes are in this. Okay, but now I want to just talk about the inuahedron inner architecture here, because it looks very complex here on the surface, and it is internally got some incredible sacred geometry by those truncated dodecahedron that are within this. But it really came down to the triangles, the regular equilateral triangles, the 6 of them that rotate around these triangles. There's 20 of them. So there are 120 of these triangles that are going to overlap. They are what are producing the nonagons, and they're also creating that decagon. So let me just go to this one, because I know we still have a lot going on in that one, and look at how the 120 triangles, they're what give the 360 vertices, is really these triangles, or the decagons. There's 72 of decagons. They're part of the triangle. 72 decagons are in here, but that's why they don't meet to create a regular pentagon. They meet internally, and that's what the deal is with this weird shaped decagon in the middle. It's because each of these lines, you could see, they're actually triangles that meet at the tip of the square, okay? So if I go across right here, and then I go up to that point, that little pointy point down at the tip there, and back to there, that's an equilateral triangle. So they're hidden into the form, but there are 120 of those triangles in there of the 72 decagons that are the stars floating in space. Because if you remove all the rest of the connecting lines I did to make the form, essentially you have those stars. And if we do the rest of the connections, we'll have the 72 decagons, which I didn't do a drawing of, but now that I'm looking at it, maybe that would be cool. So this is actually a plane. Those are the nonagons, and this is a flat triangle. That's why those are just flat. And these are really just three-dimensional space projected on the 2D. Okay, we're almost coming into the end of this here now. So we got to go back to the beginning and really look at what's going on with the inner structure of our golden Knew Merkaba. And hold on one sec. I want to close that window because it just started pouring. All right, I'm back. Just want to make sure that didn't pick up in the audio and get all confusing background sound. But okay, so let's go back to the beginning and go back to our golden Knew Golden Merkaba here. And I wanted to be like, figure out really where is this now in this whole thing? Because boy, this really like ballooned into this, right? And the foundation of it is the core. This structure is like the core of the whole thing because it grew out from there. So really what's happening here is the dotted lines are the form in square view, and some of them are hidden inside a dodecahedron. But on the face of a dodecahedron is that rectangle. It's right on the face. It's actually following the angle of the face. So there are actually 12 of those rectangles that are of this form that are on the dodecahedron. And the decagon that goes around that, remember, that goes back to this form, the truncated dodeca-dodecahedron, right? That decagon is that one, and that is also on the dodecahedron as well. But inside this is a stack of cubes. There's actually 7 cubes are in the core because each of these are a square. And if I rotate it this way, you have a square. And then up to here is a square that's on top of it. So it's really following 7 central cubes, one in the center and the 6 around it. This is kind of it in a 3D view. I have one more down at the bottom here because I guess I was doing something else. I guess we can delete that one. There you go. That's what it looks like. Just kind of tilt it a little bit so you can see there's tops to those, okay? And then these other cubes, one's in the center and one's on the back side you can't see. That's what's at the heart of this, right? Is that central tree structure, which was created by these trees of light that were around it. But the key point here that I want to make is that there are not just one dodecahedron in that outline. To complete the whole form, you need 2 dodecahedrons that come together to produce another structure, another form, and that's this one. And I've talked about this. This is one of the first new geometry forms I ever made because I looked at this, I was like, there are 2 dodecahedron in there, it's not just one. And that makes another structure with golden hexagon faces. This is some of my first videos talked about this golden hexagon. For the first videos after I had an expansion of understanding of how the golden ratio forms fit into this, the square view drawing came up of the 2 dodecahedron crisscross, compounded together. And our form, I didn't do the dotted lines on this one, is within this. And there are 2 of them, and that provides the other rectangles that are on the faces of this form. So it's 2 dodecahedron coming together to create the whole thing. And yes, even that dodecahedron, the compound of 2, which is this form, yes, that is made of the tree of light too. So The tree of light is essentially all the other edges, all the edges in this form are made of the tree of light. And I'm going to have to leave it at that because I rotate this form in fivefold symmetry, which I did prior to all this information I just shared with you, going back and forth. And this is the dodecahedron, which everything I've showed you up to this point is basically a truncation of these two dodecahedron that are within this, because we did the truncated dodecahedron. We've really just got down to what's inside the essential core is the golden Merkaba, that plays a role inside this. It's inside the whole central structure. It's like the inner core, and it comes back down to this stack of 7 cubes that are within the center of the whole thing. All right, so there's lots more to explore with this. Just once again, I'm going to show more models and more videos about how the tree of light is in a whole series of other forms that kind of pull together a lot of the working with the fivefold symmetry of then rotating this around and showing what the inner architecture of those are. But the Merkaba is something that is an expansion of consciousness that engages us and moves us beyond the bounds of where we currently were. And this golden Merkaba, let's just go back to the beginning of how it was created, comes from the expansion of the cube edges or the tetrahedron edges out to create the nonagon. And then everything that you saw came after that was from that expansion to that central core of the star tetrahedron, and then working with icosahedral symmetry to also produce some other forms that would spring from that. So once again, I just wanted to reiterate, here's the New Geometers meetup over at the New Geometry Courses spot. Here's the URL. I'll put that in the description. It's going to meet. This is June 4th, 2023 at 1 p.m. It's going to be a 60-minute hands-on drawing / discussion, because we will talk about this video and other things that are coming up and related to sacred geometry or other videos. The materials list is provided, and come prepared to draw. $9 class coming up. Hope you'll make it. We'll take a look at the material in this video and do some drawings, and I'll show you in some behind the scenes into some of the drawing setups that I've done to produce these images, and talk about how I'm looking at the drawings to come up with some of these rotations and planes that I described. So let me show you some of the models, and then we'll wrap it up. I also have, of course, apprenticeships, which are 8 weeks, other courses on the New Geometry's course site, so just poke around there a little bit. New Geometers Facebook group is a great group, over 3,000 members in there. Check that out. Great geometers sharing plenty of stuff, and of course, I'm always posting videos and other things there. So check that out as well. Now, here is the ultimate inuahedron form of the nonagons. There's so much tape on it, it looks glossy. I mean, just about every square inch had to have a piece of tape on it. But there's that pentagon. Now, you can see that those are the triangles, and they're connecting up to the square tips. And remember, the triangles of this form are underneath it, right? And there's 6 of them in there that are rotated around. I really like this one, which is just the 2 of these, right? Put it in square view so we could see. They're not to scale, but this one is just rotated this way, and it produces all the vertices and those golden hexagons on top. Very cool form. This is the one that rotated around in the icosahedral symmetry to give rise to this one, right? And this one is the Knew Golden Merkaba, because that's the one that started the construction of growing it out. That one rotated icosahedral symmetry. That created this one. This is the truncated dodeca-dodecahedron. And you can see on the surfaces here, those are the rectangles. There's one squared up to you. Those are the lines of the trees of light going across. So that means there are trees of light in here. That meaning if I hold it this way, we should be able to follow around the tree of light all the way around just along that plane, like so. We have this one here. That was the one I ended with. This is one of the first little forms I made. And it's the 2 dodecahedron, and we're going to talk more about that one in the future. And just a few other things I touched upon in the video. This is the, let me see if I can hold it just right to get it oriented to show a kind of tree of life. I know that's, oh, hold on, it's better this way. Tree of life setup. There we go. Oh, no, that's still not it. You got to hold it just right. Oh, there we go. I know it's going to look very weird because of 3D depth perception. And there's the Kathara grid, one unit of it. Okay, everybody, that was a lot of fun. I hope you really enjoyed that video. I had a lot of fun making it. A lot of love and light went into all the production of that and working and contemplating the construction of all these forms. So I hope it came together in a coherent way for you. Lots more to explore. I'm looking forward to next time. Much love and peace. Thanks for being here, and subscribe to the New Geometry channel, and I'll see you in the future. All right, peace. Bye.